Alright, hi everyone, I'm not good at lying, and welcome back to A Dark Secret, Part 4. Last time we left off, our protagonist here was possibly about to murder someone. Let's get back to it. She looked away from the strange image of herself, now only concentrating on what was to come. Closing her eyes, she felt the presence of 5 people. She heard their regular breathing, felt the warmth of their bodies, firmly asleep and wrapped in a warm blanket. She turned into the direction of the smaller bodies, the more quiet breathing. It would be quick. They would not suffer, for they have not brought suffering upon another. Wow, she's gonna kill a bunch of people apparently. All together, sleeping in one bed. That made it easier. She did not want them to wake up. They should not be afraid. Their innocent dreams should continue in eternal sleep. She gathered her focus, collected the magic from every fiber of her body. Raising her hands towards them, she recollected the words, and the quiet whisper of death gained shape as an unseen cloud of red glowing power floated across the room. There was no hesitation, no regret as the mighty dust settled on their faces. Breathing it in, they allowed the force in, welcomed it with their bodies. It was quiet, peaceful. Their regular breath became slower, weaker. Shiria felt the power of life fading, and finally leaving them when they breathed out the white light of vitality with their last breath. It seemed to linger above them, confused about the early deaths of these young creatures. They knew the time for them to leave had not yet come. It was not up to them, despite all their mourning they had to accept it. They had to leave, and so they slowly dissolved, blowing their last unspoken disapproval toward Shiria. She smiled. They had not woken up, they had not felt pain. Her crime had been merciful. With quiet steps, she turned around and walked into the room of the dead children's parents. The reason she had come to take their innocent lives. In front of the couple's bed, she came to a stop. His wife caught her attention by turning to the other side and mumbling in her sleep. Was she guilty? Did she know about her husband's actions? How should she die? It wasn't a question of sparing her life or not. With all her family dead, she surely wouldn't want to live anyway. Did she deserve the same mercy as her children had received? Or should she die the same way her husband was doomed to? Shiria's unexpected hesitation woke the evil inside her. She had not received any mercy. There was no mercy she had to spare. With a smooth gesture, she drew the knife from her sleeve. The sharp blade reflected the faint light from her eyes, making the entirety of the situation seem unreal. Putting her focus back on the 2 people in front of her, she decided that she did not mind whether they were awake or not. However, she would not wake them. Her task was not to wake them, but to kill them. It only took a single leap for her to reach the side of the bed on which the woman slept. Leaning over her, an inhuman bend, she could smell her blood rushing through the veins. A deep breath. One look from the person to the weapon in her hand. With one quick motion, she held down the woman's head, while the other hand led the blade to her throat. The cold metal mixed with the warmth of blood as it dug deep into her flesh. The liquid ran down the sides of her neck, over Shiria's hand, and stained the pale skin and the sleeves of her dark clothing. No sound left the woman's mouth as she gasped for air a last time, breathing in only her own blood, and the vital light, tainted by the dark blood, creeped out of her open mouth into the freedom of the universe. This time, it did not linger. Shiria straightened. She could not believe that her husband had not woken up while she killed his wife. I guess they either weren't in love, or love doesn't create an emotional bond after all. All lies. Who needs love? Slowly she walked around the bed, in a way hoping he would wake up. He didn't. He remained firmly asleep. She quietly laughed out. I wish you could see this. Look at your dead wife, at your children. Again, she chuckled. There was no hesitation, no thinking when she dropped the tip of the blade at his throat and pushed. With her violently magical strength, it took her no effort to push it through his bones. In difference to his wife, he did not receive an instant death. He woke up with widely open eyes and he stared up to her in bottomless fear and pain. His breath was a rattling noise caused by the mixture of blood and air he was breathing. Shiria smiled. "Don't worry, my dear. You don't have to fear for your life. You will die. There is nothing you can do about it." The spirit of life emerged from his throat and came towards his mouth. He breathed it in and out a couple times before his eyes went blank and his chest stopped moving. Only then the spiritual fog floated out of his body. Again, it did not linger. With an insane laughter, Shiria ran out of the house and into the darkness of the night. The people believed it was an insane person who had randomly chosen that family and killed them. A few weeks later, Shiria had prepared for her next task. She was unhappy, felt unsatisfied with what she had received. In her eyes, he had not suffered enough and the deaths of his children bothered her. After all, she only wanted to take revenge, not to take innocent lives that weren't hers to take. It upset her and made her even more crazy. Already she knew that she would not stop killing her at her teacher again the next time. She had to eliminate his entire family. Her mind continuously worked on her heart, attempting to make her feel comfortable with the thought. Yet she was not heartless, though. She was determined to keep at her goal the next time, and not take the entire family's life, not knowing whether they were guilty or not. The teacher lived with his 2 children and his wife in a house near the last ones, again near the school. Knowing the area like her, she had no problems finding a good spot for her observation, neither to find out the easiest way to attempt her unseen crimes. Soon, she was ready. Her magic had gotten even more powerful, and her determination was unique. Like the last time, she waited for nightfall and entered the house with the same tactic through a window in the backside. Inside, it was warm, which made her feel uncomfortable. Her mansion was always cold, and she appreciated that. The magic inside her streamed through her body with unequal warmth, and the comfort of coldness around her was needed to keep her calm. Not having this comfort made her nervous. She closed her eyes for a moment to gain sight in the darkness all around, and felt the comfortable feeling of cool around her eyes, where the magic was unleashed. That made her feel better. She breathed in and could, after her last task's experiences, smell the blood in the veins of the people inside the house. The difference between the children's blood and that of her parents was remarkably different. It was no issue for her to determine where she had to go. She left the children and went straight to her parents' bedroom. This time she would not kill anyone who was guilty. Standing in front of the beds of the teacher and his wife, she focused straight on him, ignoring his wife completely. She stared at him and focused on unleashing the deadly power only towards him. A dark red aura emerged around the man. It opened his mouth and filled it. He woke up, unable to make a sound. In his eyes lay the same fear she had previously seen in the last teacher's face. It gave her satisfaction. She smiled at him as he raised her hand, forming a fist. The fog around his body tightened. The man gasped silently when the pain began. The more she formed a fist with her hand, the tighter the fog closed around the man's body. As slowly as she could without pausing, she closed it. The dust around his body became one, melted together to an impenetrable wall around him. As she was closing her fist firmly, the fog around him did the same. It pressed the sides of his body together, effortlessly squashing his bones into a different shape. As his bones broke, his skin burst open. Blood and intestines violently ripped out of his modified body, splashed around the room. Okay. They hit the walls, some of the furniture, Shiria and his wife. She awoke, wearily blinking in the direction of her husband. Seeing the squashed mass that had once been her husband, she was suddenly wide awake. Shiria waited patiently, and calmly, giving herself time to think about how to handle the upcoming situation and problem. She waited and wanted to just disappear back through the window before she would be discovered. Despite the darkness that was all around, she knew that shapes could be vaguely noticed by anyone, and she could not risk being seen. Then she realized the woman's next intent would be to scream. She had not expected that, neither did she know how to handle that. The scream would wake up her children, and she could not let that happen. With a single reaction, she pulled her knife out of her belt and threw it. With the help of her magic, it hit its target at full force. Her magic led the knife directly through her throat, made it cut the ties that kept her head on her neck, and returned to its owner. As the woman's head slowly trembled and began to fall off the side of the stump of her neck, Shiria was already on her way back out the window to leave the place of horror. With an intense scream, with an insane scream, Shiria ran out of the house and into the darkness of the night. The people believed it was a murderer hired to kill the two of them, since the children were still alive. Another day, another task ahead. This time there was no long break for Shiria in between her two assignments. Obviously, she was the one putting herself through the rather tight schedule, but it was the impatience that lured inside of her to get through to her parents that drove her onward so quickly. She was actually looking forward to the next job, though. It concerned one of the teachers that barely had any family. He still lived with his parents, who nourish him and clean after him as if he was a baby still. It would be pleasurable to inflict pain upon them in order to make him feel it through their screams. The pure thought of it made her smile. She knew his habits. She had visited him before. Back then it had been for his pleasure. And now she would visit him for her own. He would suffer, for he had brought misery upon her. There was absolutely no hesitation or doubt in her mind when she made her way to his house that night. To her surprise, the front door was unlocked. He didn't seem to have expected anyone, neither did his family, if they didn't even put the tiny effort into locking their door. She was assuming that no one expected a crazy witch like her to break into their house and torture them to death. The thought made her chuckle. I mean, these guys deserve it, but damn. Quietly, she opened the door and slipped past it, closing and locking it behind her. She wasn't sure it was normal for this house to be locked, but if anyone tried to get in while she was still inside the house, it was certain to buy her some time if she had to abandon that night's quest for her own safety. Once inside, she held on for a moment, enabling the skills that would allow her to coordinate better in this familiar environment. She knew that his parents knew what he was up to, had been up to with her, and was possibly up to with more girls before and after her. They had not helped her or others. They had stood with their son. She could not blame them for that, for it was what she had wished for from her parents. But she did blame them for wronging her and others by looking away. Their ignorance disgusted her. They would pay for it. They were guilty. Shiria firstly made her way to her parents' bedroom. It did not take her long to get to them. Make them wake up to her powers and tie them to the walls. Held by invisible strings of power, their ties were unbreakable. They could not escape. The second thing she did was walk into the separate room of the teacher. For a while, she just stood in front of his bed, watching him sleep. The sight disturbed her. When she got too angry to keep standing where she was, she lifted her hand, releasing a small burst of energy meant to wake him up and force him on his feet. It did its job, and only a moment later he was looking into Shiria's red-eyed face. With a grin, she turned around and forced him to walk behind her into the room where she held his parents. When her former teacher and his family saw each other in the situation they were in, their first expression on their faces was fear. Fear for each other, fear for themselves. For Shiria, it was all the same. She enjoyed it. The more afraid they would be, the more pleasurable for her. She was satisfied when she saw the teacher grasping in despair about his and his parents' pointless situation. With a wink of her hand, she forced them on the wall behind her, making him look directly at his parents. She had planned on a long variety of torture set up for his parents and for him, but now when it mattered, Shiria was overwhelmed by old pain and unbearable anger which she could not control. Grimacing in anxiety and lust to kill, she turned towards his parents and stared at them, one then the other. It was not her usual blank stare. Instead, it was filled with suppressed emotions and unprocessed trauma. She did not even attempt to tame it. All the forgotten emotions and the hopeless cage of her situation and who she had become reflected in the outburst of power that happened. Any kind of control she had kept crumbled. The magic within her took over her body, her mind, her deeds. Within a single moment, she unleashed an ineffable wave of energy. It built up in a dome around her, expanding with each of her unrhythmic breaths, until finally it burst into a million red shards, each of them as big as a human hand. They floated into the air for a second before turning around to one of the three victims. The moment after, everything was quiet. Shiria closed her eyes. She felt tired. The exhaustion made her tear up. In no way she wanted to see the outcome of her failure. Finally, she realized that she did have to deal with it and leave the place before anyone would notice something strange around the house. She opened her eyes again and looked around from one person to the other. The walls around them had crumbled, in certain places broken. Through newly created holes in the roof, she could see the moonlight shine down upon 3 dead corpses, each pierced by 1,000 red shards. They stuck in their bodies, nailing them to cold, wooden walls. She smiled. At least they were dead. She had not failed completely. When she heard voices from the outside, she realized it would be best to disappear as soon as she could. Newly embracing her magic with the last bit of energy left inside of her, she regained her night vision and climbed out the back side of the house through an open window, destroyed by the burst of power. With an insane chuckle, Shiria ran out of the house and into the darkness of the night. The people believed it was a mad magician and were now alarmed by the magical powers they had seen. Oh wow, I'm 17 minutes in. I kinda don't want to stop. You know what? This might be a long video, guys. After the events of the last night of action, Shiria was very uncertain about how to proceed. She certainly didn't want things to escalate like that time. Stuck between wanting to continue and not wanting things to go wrong again, she was very confused, and as much as she hated to admit it, also frightened. Fear was not on her list of emotions anymore. She knew she was not supposed to feel any of that. After a while of consideration, she decided to take a different step and take a new approach at her next task. She would aim for an approach of torturing her next victim's mind into insanity before killing him. That way, she thought she might be less likely to snap once more. Actually, guys, I am going to have to stop because I don't want my recorder to mess up and lose all of this. So, I hope you guys liked the video. If you did like the video, comment on the video, subscribe to the video or me. Thank you so much for watching. The download link for this game will be in the description below if you guys want to check it out. It is an amazing game, if you could call it that, so far. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.